Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Thomas Talks on Thursday. My name is Thomas Minert. I am an agent at Remax Precision. I'm a member of the Sphere Real Estate Group, and this is my weekly live stream that I do where I talk to you about real estate, other things going on in Des Moines, just things that interest me. But the important part about this live stream is completely live and it is open to your comments. I want it to be more of a discussion and to see a little bit more in depth about real estate topics and a little bit more what it would be like talking to me if you were to hire me as your real estate agent. And today, this question actually came from a follower on a previous video 2 weeks ago, and it was Landon Buckman. And he commented something along the lines of there's just a lot of surprises and a lot of unknowns when you are selling your home for the first time. And I think a lot of real estate agents' videos focus on what it's like to be a first time home buyer. So there's a lot of that content out there. And a lot of first time home buyers, if they're going with the right agent or if they're doing their proper research and everything like that, there's not a lot that is unexpected if you're working with the right person. But I think there's just a lot of things that come up on the sell side the first time it comes for you to sell that are unexpected. So I just went ahead and kind of brain dumped and made 10 things that I think come up most common that sellers aren't prepared for when they first sell their home. So that's what I'm going to run through. I'm going to run through 10 things that you might know or might not know if you have never sold a piece of real estate. So let's get into it. The first one that I pulled up, let's pull it up like this, is common costs common seller costs in the state of Iowa. So a lot of people know that if you're going to list it on the MLS with an agent, you're going to be paying some sort of compensation, which I will be talking more about lately. But that is one of the major costs of selling your home. But there's a lot of other stuff that comes up that I want sellers to be prepared for. And I want you to be thinking about because it is not as simple as I could sell the house for 300. I owe 200 on the mortgage. I'm going to make $100,000 because it's not that simple. So, paying buyers closing costs or some sort of concession is really, really common. People should be prepared for that. Your mortgage payoff normally, obviously, when you sell your house, your mortgage has to be paid off, but it normally ends up being actually a little bit higher than what you were to go and look up and say you owe. So that's something to be prepared for. In the state of Iowa, you have revenue stamps. It's a low fee, but you are paying a little bit of a sales tax every time you sell your home. And then in the state of Iowa, when you're paying your property taxes, you're actually paying for the previous year. So something to be prepared every time you sell in the state of Iowa, it is common for you to pay your taxes up to date for when you've been living in the house, but you haven't technically paid for it. So if you were to sell your house today, August 20th, you would be paying for 8 months and 20 days of living in the house that you haven't technically paid for. And then you would also be making sure that you're paying for the property tax bill that would be due in September, which would be the second half of 2025. So you're paying that all up to date, and you're basically giving that money to the buyer to start their escrow account. And this is normally a bad feeling, but the thing to keep in mind is if you are going and moving into another property, that seller of that property is doing that same exact thing. They're funding your escrow account to start you to be able to pay your taxes. So that is something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is if there is ever extra money in your escrow for the mortgage that you were closing, you're going to get that money back as well. Abstracting is a fee that comes up all the time. In the state of Iowa, we actually keep paper abstracts. So every time an abstract is the history of the home. Every time you sell your house, you're paying a lawyer to update that abstract to the date you're going to sell it. All they're really doing is making sure that there's no liens on the property, no money that you owe, and then they're kind of updating the history of Thomas has owned this house from 2017. He paid this in 2017. He's selling it in 2026 for this and any other things that might have happened to the property in the time that you've owned it. If there's been an improvement, if the lot lines have changed, they're doing all of that stuff to update that paper abstract. The seller most commonly, this is something that's on the purchase agreement, but the seller most commonly pays for the termite inspection. Termite inspection is basically it's a pest inspection, but they're mostly looking for termites, and they're making sure that there's no wood destroying insects in the house, or is there signs of wood destroying insects. So you as a seller typically are paying for that inspection, and if there's any signs of termites, um, you're more than likely paying for it to get treated. And then if the signs are so bad that there's a structural issue, that kind of just needs to get talked about and figured out. Properties in the state of Iowa typically sell every 7 years, so it's really, really rare to see a home that has had so much termite damage that there's a structural issue, but it's not completely unheard of. Termite inspections are required for basically all types of loans, so the buyers are going to ask for it. Just comes down to who's paying for it, and most commonly the seller is paying for it. Courier fees, the paper abstract that I'm talking about, is not something that's online, so it physically needs to be moved from point A to point B to point C, and typically that falls on the seller to get that. And then doc prep fees. So on top of all the abstracting that is done, there's just certain documents that need to be made up. There's the closing disclosure, the warranty deed. There's so many legal documents that need to be made up that can't be done by a real estate agent. So you're paying doc prep fees as well too. Anytime I sit someone down to sell their house, I give them what's called an estimate of proceeds. So you don't need to look up what all of these cost. I will estimate all of them for you. So not only do you know how much I think you can sell your house for, I will show you all the math as far as what that actual proceeds check will be. So before you list your house, you have a really, really good idea of, hey, if I accept at this price, I'm going to make this much money. It is an estimate of proceeds, but I'm not going to be way off. So you will have a really, really good idea of how much you would actually be making. And then anytime we get an offer in, if it's less than list price or way lower or way higher, I will redo the estimate of proceeds so you have a good idea at that point before accepting as well, too. So something to know. So the other thing that I think sellers should know is how compensation actually works in the state of Iowa and pretty much all the United States. So this could be a whole episode on itself, but the basics I want people to know is all agent compensation is negotiable in the state of Iowa. There are common compensations that agents will ask for. Like you'll hear the same number from a lot of different agents, but just know that it is all negotiable. The biggest thing with that is to make sure that compensation that they are looking for, that you are getting your value out of it. So if you feel like the agent, based on what they've told you, is not necessarily going to earn that money, make sure to either negotiate the compensation or find a different agent. The buyer's agent compensation is not attached to the listing side anymore. So the way it used to work 3 years ago, 2 years ago now, is you would sign a listing agreement with someone, and that listing agent would not only negotiate their side of the compensation, they would put down on paper the buyer's compensation on there as well. And you would agree to pay both of those no matter what kind of offer came through or what type of buyer came through. You would agree to pay that on the listing. So now that is completely decoupled. So when you hire a buyer's agent, they negotiate their compensation with you, the buyer, and then the listing agent, I negotiate my compensation with you, the seller. And then you get an offer that comes in, and that compensation is attached to the offer. It is just one of the terms that you can negotiate on. Now, I will say Remax's listing agreement does have in there how much you are willing to pay a buyer's agent, but that is no longer shared on the MLS or anywhere online. The way it used to work is I would be able to look at a listing on my portal. You'd be able to look at a listing on Zillow and you would see how much they were offering the buyer's agent. That is no longer attached to the MLS at all. So the thing to know about with this is on my listing agreement, it says, yes, I'm willing to pay a buyer's agent up to this, but that all depends on the offer. So in the hypothetical world, you get an offer way below list price. It is totally up to you. You can negotiate on the offer price. You can negotiate on the buyer's agent compensation. You can negotiate on any other terms that they have. It is just one term that is in there that is negotiated. So that's kind of the basics of compensation, something to be prepared for, depending on how your agent explains it. So the other thing to prepare for is preparing your home to list in general. So the three most important things to me on the list side is I'm not going to look at you and tell you to do a bunch of crazy projects. Every house is unique, and I have different recommendations for every house. But at a bare minimum, I think you should think about getting the place deep cleaned. Whether you want to do it yourself or hire someone, I think it helps a ton. I think you should declutter as much as possible. Listing a house to sell versus having it be decluttered to live in is two totally separate things. So when you are listing your house to sell, you have to think there's going to be quite a few people walking through your home at one time. So you want to make sure that the walkways are as clear as possible to make the rooms feel as spacious as possible. That is the goal with decluttering. Decluttering, I'm also talking about the counter spaces as well. As much as you can get the counter spaces cleared off, it makes the home feel bigger. It makes the home feel more welcoming. The most common culprits of this I see are people's kitchen counters and their bathroom counters. So bathroom counters, I'm literally talking about nothing on the bathroom counters. It makes it look cleaner. It makes it look more open. It makes the buyers start to imagine what they would do with the home. Kitchen counters, if that coffee maker is really, really important to you, keep that on the counter. But a lot of people like to keep other appliances on the counter. It just makes the place start to seem really, really cluttered. So clear that stuff off. And no, it's annoying because you're still living in the home, but it does really, really help. And then staging, I could give a staging consult. If you're interested, I could get a professional staging consult as well. I can also get a professional stager in there to actually put their furniture in it if the home is going to be vacant, if we think it's worthwhile to stage it. But staging does really, really help because those stagers have just another eye on top of it to make the home feel as inviting as possible. It really, really depends house to house, but some high ROI, return on investment improvements to think about are paint, flooring, and landscaping. Landscaping is a big one because the first thing people are going to see when they're going to your home to see it is your front yard. So if your landscaping is well maintained and cleaned up, I'm not saying to add a water feature or anything crazy like that. I am just saying to keep in mind that it's the first thing people see. So if it looks clean and well cared for, it can go a long ways. Paint is relatively cheap. It makes the home seem cleaner. It removes a lot of odor. Um, and it kind of gives people a blank canvas and it just makes the home seem like it's well cared for as well. Same thing with flooring. If you replace carpet, it's one of the bigger complaints of buyers that I have. If you replace carpet, it takes away a lot of odor. If you replace tile, hard surface floors, it can make the same thing, can make it seem way cleaner, way newer. And people typically will see a very, very high rate of return on those things. So be prepared. For me, bare minimum to suggest cleaning, decluttering, and staging, and then paint, flooring, and landscaping as needed. Those are some big ones. The other thing in general is just to think about preparing for showings in general. It's kind of a nuisance. I'll be totally honest with you. It's one of the more annoying parts about selling your home, but you have to think about the buyer does not want you to be there. So you have to think about where am I going to go? Where am I going to take the kids? Where am I going to take the dog? And then other thing is to think about, can I have this house clean and show ready within an hour, within 2 hours? Because sometimes these showing requests come very, very quickly. So think about a morning routine where you're decluttering and cleaning a little bit, and then just think about, hey, if we get a showing request at 4:30, I'm going to run home. I have an empty laundry basket. I'm going to throw just all the odds and ends into the empty laundry basket. I'm going to put it in my car and I'm going to go. Easy as that. Just make a game plan for stuff like that. Preparing for inspection. So the 7 years I've been doing this typically is the most stressful part of selling a home is the inspection process. So I just want to talk you guys through what the buyers are looking for when they do an inspection and what that looks like after they have done the inspection, just so you guys are prepared for it. So the buyers are looking for any health or safety issues. They're looking for structural issues, and they are looking for anything that could potentially cost more than $500 to fix. After they find those issues, the inspector will send them a report. They look at the report and they decide from their point of view, if these three things don't get fixed, I no longer want to close on the home. So they send those inspection requests to the sellers. You then have 3 days to respond to it. And the biggest things to know is that an inspection is not pass fail. You're not going to get a buyer that says, hey, you failed the inspection, I no longer want the house. They're making these specific requests. They're either looking for repairs or they're looking for a credit to get the issues mitigated. But this is all basically a second negotiation. You are not on the hook to say yes to everything that they request. Basically, the way I'm talking about it with my sellers is this a fair and reasonable request? Cool. Do we want to fix it the way that they laid out? Or do we want to come up with an alternative? And basically, it's a back and forth from there. The thing to keep in mind is if you don't accept it exactly the way that they wrote it, that gives them an opportunity to back out and cancel the contract. So, just something to keep in mind. But you're not on the hook to do all the repairs that they request, and it is a second negotiated, is the thing to keep in mind. Let's talk about filling out the seller's disclosure. So, in the state of Iowa and in Des Moines, we have what's a seller's disclosure. Basically, this is a series of basic questions that ask you what you know about the condition of your property. The two big things to remember when I talk to people about this is if you've had previous issues that you have fixed, it is a really, really good idea to disclose them. So hypothetically, you had a storm come through in 2018 and you had to replace the roof. Disclose it. Because disclose, hey, the derecho happened. Have you ever heard of it? We replaced the roof. And we did it in 2018. Here's the invoice. Cool. That shows that you're maintaining your home. And when that inspection process happens, if they see any signs that there was water damage in the attic, but it looks old, they immediately know the answer to this. Well, they disclosed in 2018 that there's issues with the roof. They replaced it. Cool. And then you just move on. It shows that you're being honest and it shows that you're maintaining your home. The second thing is if, and then talk to me about this. You have to fill this out yourself, but talk to me about it. When in doubt, disclose though. If any of these questions triggers like, oh, well, we had a little bit of moisture in our basement in 2019, whatever, and we haven't had any issues since, disclose it. I'm not a lawyer, but it's much safer for you to just go ahead and put that down on paper, because if there was ever any issue later on and the buyer tried to come back on you and say you knew about this and didn't disclose it, it could get you in a lot of hot water. But if you put it on that piece of paper, you say, no, I told you in 2019 I had this little bit of water, haven't had any issues since, I was being totally honest on that, hey, you're good to go. So that's something to prepare for. And on this note too, as far as being prepared, if you have any repair done on your house, grab a folder, whether it's a physical real life folder or an email folder, save all of that stuff. I've even seen online people making actual emails for their house, and anything house related, they have it sent to that email. So then they just have it all saved on one email account. And it's just super easy to maintain. The more records of stuff that you have to share with buyers and make them more confident, the better. So something to think about. This is just kind of a layout of terms that I think are important in an offer outside of just the offer price. Obviously, the biggest winner is the offer that is going to make you the most money, but these are things to think about as well. So earnest money is a good faith deposit that a buyer puts down to show how serious they are about the house. It gets deposited within 3 business days and it gets put into a trust account. If the buyer were to back out of the contract for any reason that is not disclosed in the contract, you, the seller, gets to keep that money. So the higher the number there, basically they're telling you they're more and more serious about the house. Typically, we're looking for the earnest money to be about 1% of the purchase price, or the bare minimum 1,000 is normally what I'm looking for, unless it is a really low priced home. Loan terms, in Iowa, central Iowa, you're looking at conventional would be your most common. FHA, VA are also very, very common. And then USDA if you're living in small town Iowa. Um, just knowing the difference between those loans, and any agent will talk you through that. Just knowing how to assess it. And then obviously, another financing term is cash. Ultimately, there's positives of cash, there's positives of conventional, and then VA and FHA can also be really, really strong depending on how the pre-approval letter is written. But if you're in multiple offer scenarios, it is important to know if any of the loan types are different. Loan down payment, obviously, the higher the down payment, the better, because the more lax the loan terms will more than likely be. And just your buyer having more cash as a down payment is normally a good sign because that means they're more and more qualified. Inspection deadline, typically it's become kind of a standard in our industry to have a 10 business day inspection period. But if a buyer is more serious about the home, they will often do a shorter inspection period. That can be really appealing to you as the seller because it means that the whole process is going to go quicker. I mentioned that the inspection is typically the most stressful part. The idea of that being done quicker is normally appealing to sellers. Closing date, it depends on what you as the seller wants. But obviously, if one buyer comes in and can close a whole 2 weeks earlier than another buyer, that can be appealing if you want to close as quickly as possible. Or if it's just someone offering that says, hey, closing date's all you. You literally get to pick the date. That can be very, very appealing as well. Delayed possession is something that's not very common, but um, that can be really, really appealing to sellers, especially sellers that are buying new construction or just any house in general. Being able to close, get that cash, purchase their next place, but then have more than just one day to move into the next place can be very, very appealing. Because it just decreases a lot of stress. So that's a term that I've often seen sellers give up on higher offers to get that delayed possession. It's something that ends up being very, very positive to them. Subject to home of choice. This is a contingency I talk to people about before listing, but basically, subject to home of choice means, hey, we're going to accept this offer, but you have to give us 14 days to figure out where we're moving next, or whatever the timeline is that is discussed. Um, it puts you in a good position for when you turn into the buyer because you have a accepted offer. Instead of writing an offer on your next place subject to sale because you don't have an accepted offer yet, you're writing on it subject to close, which is much, much more strong. So it puts you in a really, really good position for the next place you're buying. Those contingencies typically have something written in there that the closing gets pushed out or possibly canceled if you don't find your next place. So it's sometimes a hard term to talk buyers into, but something to think about. So this is just really quickly a timeline of what happens after accepted offer because it's not as simple as, hey, we accepted an offer, this is a done deal. There's lots of little hurdles that you have to get over to make sure the thing actually closes. A lot of the stuff you as a seller are not working on, but it's nice to know that this stuff is happening. So you know it's not just 30 days for no apparent reason. So within 3 days, I already mentioned earnest money will get deposited. Inspections are scheduled. Inspections are done. Inspection is negotiated. Appraisal is ordered and done. I'll talk about appraisal here in a little bit. Title work like that abstracting work I was talking about, that's all done. And then the buyer will have their final walkthrough. The final walkthrough is there basically just to make sure the home is in the same condition it was when they offered. And they're also verifying that inspection issues have been resolved if there was any. And then you close. So all of these things could potentially lead to reasons that the contract gets canceled. So as soon as you accept that offer, it's not a done deal. Um, all of these things have to be checked and done. So, so what is an appraisal? Appraisal is a professional opinion on the home's market value. The appraisal is done by the buyer's lender. They are basically verifying that the loan that they are giving this buyer is a good investment because they don't want to give a loan to someone for a home that they offer 300,000 on that's not actually worth 300,000. They only want to give a loan for 80% of market value, for example. And they're having that appraiser out there to verify that that home is worth what they offered. If the appraisal comes in low, it basically opens up a whole nother negotiation. And they say, hey, we know we offered 300, but the appraisal came back at 290. So we can only get a loan based on it being worth 290. Now, a few things can happen. Depending on the type of loan, the buyer can put more of a down payment and keep the purchase price that they had before. Um, with some loans, it is literally, hey, Mr. Seller, sorry, we wrote you an offer for 300,000, but it's only worth 290. You either have to go down to 290 or the contract is canceled and we relist the home. So just something to be prepared for. Appraisals, a majority of the time, come in at value. But it's just something to be prepared for if they do come in low. If they come in high, which can sometimes happen as well, you, the seller, will never know. All you will hear back is you'll say the appraisal came in at value, we're done with appraisal. So I talked about delayed possession, but something to keep in mind is typically the closing date is the date that the buyer gets possession of the home. So I've had a lot of sellers get tripped up on this before because it wasn't properly communicated. But just know that that closing date, that's the day you're expected to be out of the house. So you need to make plans to be have all your possessions out of the house and you not be living in the house anymore. Typically, condition wise, the buyers are looking for the home to be swept clean. They're not looking for it to be deep cleaned unless otherwise written in the purchase agreement. They're looking for it to be swept clean, and any damage that might have happened as you're moving out, they're looking for that to be repaired. So that is nail holes, that is small stuff like that. They're looking for that to be repaired. If for whatever reason you don't think you're going to be able to get in that condition, communicate with your agent and just make sure that the buyer is okay with whatever you're doing. But in general, the biggest thing, and I see a lot of sellers still not do this, is to make sure all your possessions are out of the home. No one wants your garbage in general. The other big thing is to make sure that you have set up utility transfers. If you don't set that up and the buyer also hasn't set that up, you may be on the hook for paying for power and water for the buyer for a few months. So just make sure that the utility companies know I'm moving out on X date. And then make sure it's communicated to the buyer's agent, hey, I told the utilities company that I'm going to be out on X date, and make sure that the buyer is picking up the transfer utilities. And that's it. Those were 10 things that I think you guys should know when you're prepared to be a seller. This honestly could end up being a lot longer episode. If you are ever interested yourself for what it would look like for you to sell, this is a lot of what my seller's consultation looks like. So don't be afraid to invite me out and just say, hey, how would all of this work? I'm looking to sell this and move to this. Let's create a game plan together, because everyone's home is super unique and everyone's situation is super unique. So there might be some things I didn't talk about in this presentation that might be more relevant to you, or there might be something that you've never known that I didn't quite answer. So don't be afraid to comment or message me, and I will answer those questions. Otherwise, saw quite a few people popping in and watching. I appreciate everyone for watching. If you're watching later, don't be afraid to comment on another topic you want me to talk about, whatever it is. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thank you so much.